The bandit soon comes out of the carriage, carrying Azalea in his arm. We could see that there was no reaction from her at all. Kalli could only scream out her name as he spots the bandit, who immediately makes a mad dash somewhere else while carrying her. Gadolf shouts at Kalli, wondering what he was doing. Kalli decides to chase after the bandit, telling Gadolf that he would be back in a bit. As he chased after the bandit, they soon reached a cliff where the waters were running rampant down below. Kalli was finally able to catch up to the bandit, who stopped in his tracks in silence. He places Azalea softly onto the ground before speaking, telling Kalli that he looks like a slave. With his sword drawn and a creepy smile on his face, he asks Kalli if he would join them. But our boy refuses, saying what's the point since he was aiming a weapon right at him. Kalli also knew that he would end up doing nothing more than banditry if he joined them. So the bandit decides to kill Kalli after being rejected by him, stating that this was the end of his story. Kalli notices the way he was moving, making him realize that perhaps this bandit was a gladiator. As the bandit charges forward with his sword raised high in the air, he tells Kalli that he was a gladiator with 42 wins. Seeing the incoming attack, Kalli knew that it was impossible for him to fight this bandit head-on, so he was split between fighting him or doing something else. And so, by dodging the first strike, our boy decides to do something else, which was to pass through him, much to the surprise of the bandit. Kalli immediately grabs onto Azalea, telling the bandit that he was sorry that he had no intention of fighting before leaping into the rampant waters below, with Azalea in his arms. The bandit could only watch from the cliff as Kalli and Azalea made a huge impact upon entering the waters. Kalli's voice could be heard as he gave her CPR until she was finally breathing. Azalea then slowly opens her eyes before being jolted awake by something. Seeing her reaction, Kalli couldn't help but smile while asking her if she was okay. Later on, he explains to her about what had happened with the bandits in the group. She thinks deeply and could recall that the one-eyed bandit struck her unconscious. While Kalli was impressed by the fact that he had to use the camouflage techniques he learned in the military here. Azalea then asks him to light a fire at least, but Kalli tells her that it was not possible since all the trees were moist and also, making a fire might get them caught. But then Kalli notices the intense trembling that Azalea was experiencing, making him think that her body temperature must have dropped a lot because of her wet clothes. So he advises her to take off her clothes or else she will get a cold. Azalea couldn't help but feel embarrassed from hearing that, calling Kalli a shameless bastard for thinking that way. But he tells her not to get the wrong idea, since freezing was better than dying. He tells her that he was going to turn his back. As he does, Azalea tells him that he had become quite bold. Kalli tells her that he had to protect her because if anything happens to her, then his master was going to kill him. As he continues to face the other way, Azalea threatens to kill him personally if he turns around, so our boy agrees to her request. But his face began to flush heavily as he felt his head spinning. After removing most of her clothing, Kalli asks her if she was feeling less cold. She clearly is feeling cold as her words started to stutter from the freezing. Even Azalea could see that Kalli was freezing as well, as his lips were turning blue with his body shaking with the cold. So he decides to get up, telling Azalea that there were two ways to deal with the cold. The first method was to move their bodies to raise the body temperature, while the second was to stick their bodies together. But as she continues to shake from the cold, Azalea tells him that she was fine, but was startled to see that Kalli was doing push-ups in front of her, before standing up again. He tells her that he was sorry, before hooking their arms together, causing Azalea to be shocked over what he was doing right now. He shyly tells her that they needed to stick their bodies together for warmth, as it is said to be a way for soldiers to endure the cold during winter marches. He tells her that even though she may not like it, if anything happens to her, then Kalli is automatically dead. Azalea could only fall silent after hearing Kalli's explanation. And so, the two of them continued to huddle together throughout the night, in order to keep warm. The day soon arrived. Kalli and Azalea were now traveling through the forest. Kalli turns to ask her if she could walk, but Azalea responds all tough, asking him if he would carry her if she couldn't. But then her stomach growled loud enough for Kalli to hear, making her feel all embarrassed. She immediately shouts at him, explaining that she hasn't had anything to eat since last night. But he ignores her words, as he spots a small river in front of them. Soon enough, Kalli manages to catch a fish and proceeds to cut it open. As he ate the fish, he handed a small piece over to her, but Azalea was disgusted by it at first. The moment she took her first bite, she was surprised over how good it was. They then traveled along the river. Kalli tells her that they would be able to rejoin the group if they head upstream, but Azalea was worried that they might meet the bandits first. Kalli tells her that they could only leave it up to their luck, which she finds irresponsible. He continues to tell her that he was doing his best, and that he was simply wishing her luck. Looking at our boy, Azalea couldn't help but feel at ease whenever she was near him. Realizing that the more she knew about Kalli, the more mysterious he became. Riz overflowing, the one-eyed bandit is now seen sitting on top of a pile of dead soldiers, talking about how he wanted to secure the ransom but couldn't because of a little bastard called Kalli. His face was filled with rage as he vows to kill him if he ever sees him again. But then, the sounds of branches snapping catch his attention. He quickly ducks behind some bushes, before opening a gap to show that Kalli and Azalea were walking past him. He could only think of this as a heaven-like opportunity. He spoke out loud to them, saying the following words: "They say even tigers will come if you tell them to," which was enough to startle both of them at once. "It's really nice to meet you," said the one-eyed bandit as he comes out from the bushes to face them once again. As Kalli tells Azalea to get behind him, the bandit wonders if he was planning on fighting without even a measly weapon. He tells Kalli that he was going to kill him and then take the special prize. But before he sells her, he wants to do something else as he licks his lips, causing Azalea to shudder with fear. "In your dreams, asshole, who said I'm gonna let you take her?" said Kalli as he prepared himself, while thinking that the chains he had on had been washed away by the river when he fell, making defending impossible against the bandit. With a mad look in his remaining eye and a shine to the tip of his sword, the bandit decides to cut Kalli down first. So he begins to swing at our boy, who manages to narrowly dodge the strike as it cuts pieces of his hair and clothes off. The bandit could only exclaim out loud that he was fast, but wonders for how long he can avoid these strikes of his. And so, Kalli continues to dodge the sword, bobbing and weaving, even bending backward. But the bandit does something new as he twirls his entire body, before landing a powerful kick onto Kalli, sending him flying backward as he falls to the ground. As he lay on the ground, Azalea shouted at him to watch out. He opens his eyes to see the tip of the bandit's sword just inches away from his own eye. He immediately turns away, causing the sword to hit the ground instead. As he got back on his feet, he knew that the sword has high killing power and long range, but this was something he already knew about. After all, he did face off against a boxer who has long arms, just like a sword. Knowing about guns and knives as well, Kalli knew that in order to win with your bare hands, you had no choice but to move forward. So this time, instead of backing away, Kalli charges in towards the bandit. The bandit was happy to see this as he thought that Kalli was sticking out his neck to be sliced by him. But Azalea knew that the bandit was wrong at this moment because Kalli managed to sidestep his strike before taking a swing at his body this time. Landing a powerful blow that impacted the bandit's side head-on. His face was filled with pain as his veins popped out from him trying to contain that very pain. So he decides to take it to the final end, swinging his sword widely this time across Kalli's face, who couldn't dodge the strike completely as it cuts his nose across. Kalli activates the Sharingan, knowing that what he needs now is the courage to face the blade. The determination to move forward, with another missed swing this time, the bandit realizes that Kalli was aiming for his blind spot all along. Once again, our boy manages to land a powerful uppercut directly onto the bandit's chin. But he doesn't stop there, he even grabs onto the bandit's arm, throwing him directly at one of the trees near them. A cracking sound is heard, as Kalli shatters his teeth with his fist. He even goes in for the elbow strike, showing no mercy at all. He soon comes to a stop, exhausted over his continuous attacks. As he tries to catch his breath, he mentions that he couldn't move anymore. Kalli was resting against a tree, while Azalea was still watching the bandit who lay across from them. His hand began to move, inching closer to the sword that was beside him. It turns out that the bandit was still awake, thinking about how he was definitely going to kill Kalli. But a shadow casts over him, his mind screams no as someone else picks up the sword. Azalea was holding the blade, telling the bandit that he had tried to disgrace her. And so, without hesitation, she pierces the sword right through his body, much to the shock of Kalli who sees it. Azalea tells him that even killing him 100 times wouldn't be enough. Our boy was left stunned with his mouth wide open, thinking that their young lady was not normal and that for now, all he wanted to do was to take a rest. After dealing with the one-eyed bandit, Kalli and Azalea were soon found by the rescue team and were able to return safely. Nixer was rubbing some ointment onto the cut across Kalli's face, telling him that he was lucky as he would have gone blind if the cut was a few more inches higher. But then, Nixer tells him that the scar made him look more manly and nice, making Kalli smile brightly. But as they were chatting, Gadolf called out to him, who bows his head, thanking Kalli for saving his daughter. He couldn't believe that a noble was thanking a slave, so he immediately stands up, telling Gadolf that he was simply just doing his duty. Seeing his reaction, Gadolf tells him to sit down and rest as an order, but also because Kalli deserved it. Gadolf reminded him that he had the right, but he was pissed off at the armor soldiers who weren't able to do what a simple slave could. Gadolf was also amazed that Kalli had managed to fight and win against a gladiator, making him wonder if Kalli had any secret. Kalli tells him that it helps to look weak as every opponent he defeated always underestimated him. And so, Kalli was able to rescue Azalea from the bandits and earn the noble's loyalty and everyone else. Which allowed for all three boys to ride in a carriage as Mantis questions Kalli on whether he actually defeated the gladiator. And so, the group had finally made its way to the Westley Duchy. This man right here is Duke Westley, who warmly welcomes Baron Gadolf with open arms. He was also impressed by how Azalea was becoming a lady who looks just like her mother. She bows her head at his compliment, honored that he had remembered her. But as they talked with one another, Kalli was standing behind with a nervous look on his face. A memory is seen where Azalea handed him a servant's clothes, telling him to serve instead as one of the servants had fallen ill. She even tells him that he was the best fit as the others were too ugly and had bulky bodies that can't be made into servants. But all Kalli wanted to do was to train. And so, every noble in the house was gathered at the dining table. Duke Westley turns to ask Gadolf if it was true that he had won all 3 matches from the last boxing match with just apprentices. Gadolf laughs at the question, telling Duke Westley that those 3 apprentices were now official boxers, which impresses the Duke even more. As the adults started to talk amongst themselves, Azalea was quiet before letting out a deep sigh. She then turns to her father and whispers something into his ear, before turning back to Kalli, ordering him to follow her. They soon left the mansion and walked down the streets together. Azalea tells him that she felt suffocated to the point she thought she was going to die. Azalea continues to tell him that she didn't even want to come in the first place, and wanted the adults to just talk amongst themselves. Kalli could see that she was unhappy, so she reveals to him that her father was obsessed with finding a husband for her right now. She even asks him if he thought that it was horrible to spend your life tied up at a young age. But Kalli tells him that what he thinks doesn't matter at all. But her eyes were drawn to a store beside them. Azalea then pulled out 2 sticks of candy. Handing one over to Kalli as she thought that he had never had candy before. Looking at the candy right in front of him, Kalli thought about how he hasn't eaten anything sweet except for fruits since he came into this world. As he took a bite out of it, he remarked out loud that it was delicious. Hearing his comment made Azalea smile brightly, causing every male that was around them to blush, including Kalli, who thought about how she was born with beauty. He could see that she was attracting the attention of everyone, including a suspicious old woman. But as he looked at her, he wondered why she was staring right at him. The old woman approaches, asking if she could read Azalea's fortune, which captures her interest. Kalli tells her that they should go, but Azalea was interested in the old woman as she never had her fortune read before. As they follow the old woman to a tent, she tells them that she was going to give them a cheap price for the reading. Azalea was looking around the gypsy tent all excited as she had only read about them before. But Kalli was suspicious of the old woman, wondering what she was up to just as she pulled out a bright orb on the table. She tells Azalea that her life isn't going to be smooth sailing as there will be many twists and turns. Azalea was happy to hear that as she believed that her life would be boring if it was just like everyone else's, so she tells the old woman to read her marriage or love fortune too. Kalli was stunned by her reaction, thinking that even back on Earth, fortune-telling can really drive people crazy. The old woman tells Azalea that her partner might be close by, but she won't be able to have a love that everyone blesses her with. Upon hearing her love fortune, Azalea fell silent while blushing heavily. The old woman was even willing to read Kalli's fortune, but he calmly declines her offer. But Azalea tells him to not be cold and accept it since it was free and he had nothing to lose. So, the old woman starts to read his fortune, causing the orb to glow brightly once again. She reveals to him that she could see that he had come from very far away, from a place that people here can't even imagine, which shocks Kalli. So he asks her if she knew where he came from, but the old woman didn't know as she could only say what she saw. Azalea was curious as well, so she asked the old woman about what she saw. She tells them about a metal object that flies in the sky, carriages that move without a horse, and a human being inside of a box. Kalli immediately slams his hands onto the table in shock after realizing what it is she was telling them. He continues to watch the old woman, wondering what the hell she is saying as she gazes into the glowing orb.
Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.